There's a silence that falls before the truth is spoken, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. Steve Harvey stood there, eyes locked on the sight before him. Thousands of men and women moving in perfect unity, bowing together, rising together, whispering words that carried centuries of faith. It wasn't a show. It wasn't a performance. It was something else, something older than time itself. He didn't understand it at first. He said it felt like standing in the middle of a storm that didn't make a sound. Every movement seemed to carry weight, purpose, and submission, not to a man, not to an idea, but to something higher. And in that moment, he realized these people were not praying for something. They were praying out to someone. He once asked an old man at the mosque, "Why do Muslims seem so honored, so calm even in hardship?" The man smiled, not with pride, but with understanding. "Because honor doesn't come from this world," he said softly. "It comes from knowing who we bow to." Those words echoed in Steve's mind long after. He started noticing the quiet dignity Muslims carried, the way they spoke, the patience in their trials, the strength in their faith. It wasn't arrogance, it was peace. A peace that came from surrender, not conquest. He remembered watching a janitor at an airport leave his work halfway through his shift, spreading his jacket on the cold tiles to pray. No one told him to do it. No one applauded when he finished. But the look on his face afterward, it wasn't exhaustion, it was serenity. Steve said it hit him like thunder. These people live for something the world can't give and death can't take away. But there's a darker side to honor. History remembers those who stood for truth, but it also remembers the cost. From the deserts of Arabia to the corners of the modern world, Muslims have carried their faith like a torch through the wind, facing ridicule, persecution, war, and exile. Yet through every trial, the prayer never stopped. 5 times a day, the call still echoes through the cities, the mountains, the oceans, a reminder that no empire, no power, no voice of hatred could silence it. Steve would talk about how strange it felt, the contradiction of a faith so peaceful, yet so feared. He'd say, they call them different, they call them strange, but maybe they're just closer to something the rest of us forgot. He remembered standing in the streets of Mecca, watching millions move as one, and realizing he was witnessing not just a ritual, but a promise kept across 14 centuries. He described it like watching history breathe. Every prayer mat, every bowed head, every whispered, Allahu Akbar was a heartbeat in the story of mankind, a story written not in ink, but in faith and tears. He said there was power in that surrender, not weakness, power. The kind that can't be bought, can't be faked, can't be taken away. And when he spoke about it, his voice would drop low, trembling slightly. They honor their mothers like queens, their fathers like kings, their prophet like a teacher whose words still echo. They cry for mercy in the dark and thank their Lord in the light. That's why they're honored, not because the world gave them respect, but because they earned it through devotion. There was a moment he never forgot. A funeral in the streets of a small Muslim town. No gold caskets, no music, just silence. Men carrying a body wrapped in white, women watching from a distance whispering prayers. And then, as the body was lowered into the earth, a voice rose softly. From him we come, and to him we return. Steve said it broke him, because in that moment, he realized something terrifyingly beautiful. Muslims don't fear death. They prepare for it. Every prayer, every act of kindness, every breath is a rehearsal for the return. That's why they walk with honor, because they're never lost. They know exactly where they're going. And as he told that story, his voice trembled, not from fear, but from awe. He said, you can't stand in front of that kind of faith and not feel small. The lights dimmed as he spoke those last words, the room silent except for his voice, soft, reverent, almost whispering. Maybe the world doesn't understand them because the world forgot what it means to kneel. Maybe honor doesn't come from being seen, but from bowing when no one's watching. And in that silence, you could almost hear it, the distant call of prayer, echoing through time. The sound of that distant prayer seemed to linger in the air, even after the world had gone quiet again. Steve stood there, lost in that silence, his heart heavy yet strangely light. He didn't know why, but the echo of those words, Allahu Akbar, kept circling in his mind like a melody that refused to fade. He said it was as if the world had slowed down around him, every sound, every breath, every heartbeat moving in sync with something unseen. He walked the empty street that night. The moon was pale, hanging low over the rooftops, washing the city in silver light. Somewhere far away, another call to prayer rose into the sky. He stopped walking, closed his eyes, and listened. The sound wasn't loud, but it reached him. It reached him. It felt alive, like a pulse in the distance, calling him not with words, but with meaning. That night, he couldn't sleep. He said it felt like something had shifted inside him, something small, but unstoppable. He kept replaying everything he'd seen: the man praying on cold tiles, the funeral, the bowed heads moving in unison. He had seen fame, power, but none of it carried this kind of peace. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe peace was never meant to be loud. Maybe it was meant to be silent. He remembered a conversation he once had with a young Muslim scholar. They sat together in a quiet corner of a mosque where the air smelled faintly of old books and sandalwood. Steve asked him, "What makes your faith so unshakable? How do you hold on when the world turns against you?" The young man smiled, not a proud smile, not even a confident one. It was calm, like he already knew the answer before the question was finished. "Because we don't hold on to the world," he said. "We hold on to the one who made it." Those words hit like lightning. He realized then it wasn't faith built on comfort or convenience. It was faith built on struggle, on tears, on loss. It was forged in fire and carried in silence. Muslims didn't pray 5 times a day because it was easy. They did it because it kept them alive in a world that tried to break them. Steve began noticing things others didn't. The way a Muslim would whisper a prayer before driving. The way they'd thank God before eating and again after finishing. The way they'd smile through trials and say, "Alhamdulillah, praise be to God." Even when their hearts were breaking, he said it was haunting, the way that word carried both gratitude and grief at the same time. You could lose everything and still say it. And somehow that made you the richest person alive. But then there was one night he could never forget. He was invited to a dinner in Istanbul, a city where the call to prayer dances between the sea and the sky. The gathering was small, quiet. Scholars, travelers, families, they spoke of mercy, of patience, of purpose. But when the adhan began, every voice stopped. No one told them to. It was instinct. The whole room fell silent, and one by one, people began to stand, rolling out their prayer mats. Steve watched them line up shoulder to shoulder, rich and poor, strangers and friends, all equal before their Creator. He said he felt his chest tighten, like something ancient was waking inside him. He couldn't look away. As they bowed, as their foreheads touched the ground, he felt the weight of centuries pressing down on his heart. When the prayer ended, he turned to an old man beside him, eyes glistening. "How do you keep your faith so strong?" he asked. The man's reply was almost a whisper. "Because the world breaks us every day, and every prayer puts us back together." That night, Steve walked through the old streets of Istanbul, his mind spinning with thoughts. The wind carried the scent of rain and stone. He looked at the mosques, their domes glowing faintly under the moon, their minarets piercing the sky like silent guardians. And for the first time, he felt small, not in weakness, but in humility. He said it's terrifying to realize how far humanity has drifted from reverence. We've replaced gratitude with greed, worship with noise, humility with pride. But here, in the quiet rhythm of Muslim life, he found something pure, something real. He remembered the old stories, the prophets, the trials, the wars. How men were exiled, beaten, killed for a truth they refused to abandon. He said there's something haunting about people who'd rather die on their knees than live on their feet. It forces you to question everything you think you believe. One story in particular stayed with him. He heard it from a scholar in Medina, a man who had lost everything, his family, his home. Yet he smiled as he spoke. He told Steve about Bilal, the slave who became one of the first Muslims. How he was dragged through the burning desert, stones on his chest, beaten until his voice cracked. But he never gave up. He just kept saying that one word, okay, had one. Steve said that word haunted him more than any sermon ever could. Because it wasn't just a word. It was defiance. It was freedom. It was love. A single word that meant, "I will not bow to anyone but him." He said he began to see why Muslims were honored, not by man, but by their endurance, their faith, their unshakable truth. Their honor wasn't in wealth or power, but in submission. And that realization shook him to the core. Weeks passed, but the memories clung to him like shadows. He would wake before dawn sometime, not knowing why, just awake. The world outside still asleep, the air cold and still. And he'd hear it again, the call. That same haunting voice rising through the night, cutting through every thought, every doubt, every noise. He said it made him feel something he couldn't describe, fear and peace all at once, like standing before something infinite, something watching, something that knows. One morning he followed that sound. The streets were empty, the city still wrapped in darkness. He followed until he reached a small mosque at the edge of town. The lights inside were dim. He stood outside the door, listening to the murmur of prayers. And for the first time, he felt the urge to go in. But he didn't. He said he froze at the door because part of him was afraid, not of being judged, but of being changed. He leaned against the wall, listening. The imam's voice rose and fell like a wave, and something broke inside him. He felt tears in his eyes without understanding why. It was as if every mistake, every regret, every sin he ever carried was being whispered back to him, not to shame him, but to remind him he was still alive, still capable of kneeling. He said it was the most terrifying kind of peace, the kind that strips you bare and shows you who you really are. He walked away that morning changed, though he didn't know how. He couldn't shake the image of those men and women bowing not out of fear, but out of love. He said it made him realize how lost the world had become, how desperate for something real, something constant. And then came the moment that sealed it all. He was in Cairo filming a special when the power went out. The city, usually roaring with noise and traffic, fell into silence. The lights died, but from somewhere across the city, a single voice began the adhan. Then another, and another, until the whole city, millions of people, was alive with that sound. Steve said it was like hearing the earth itself breathe. A city in darkness, but its faith glowing brighter than ever. He stood on the hotel balcony, tears in his eyes, whispering, This is what honor looks like. He began reading more after that. The Quran, the sayings of the Prophet, the stories of the companions. And the deeper he went, the darker and more beautiful it became. Because it wasn't a fairy tale, it was truth. Brutal, unfiltered truth. The kind that demands change. He read about people who gave up their wealth for a single prayer. People who forgave their enemies because God asked them to. People who lived and died believing that nothing, not pain, not power, not death itself, was greater than the Creator. And he said something that night, something few have the courage to admit. When I look at Muslims, he whispered, I see the reflection of what humanity was meant to be before pride took over. But the story didn't end there. One night during Ramadan, he visited a mosque again. The air was heavy with incense, the lights soft and golden. Rows upon rows of people sat in silence reciting the Quran. Some cried quietly. Some just sat still, their eyes closed. And when the imam began to recite, his voice broke through the quiet, deep trembling, full of longing. Steve said it felt like hearing the soul of a nation cry out to its maker. Every syllable carried centuries of devotion. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the emotion. It was the sound of surrender and freedom. After the prayer, he met a young man sitting outside, staring at the sky. Steve sat beside him and asked, Why do you pray so much? The young man smiled faintly. Because prayer reminds me I'm never alone. When the world forgets me, he remembers. Steve said he didn't reply, he couldn't, because somewhere deep down, he knew that's what he'd been searching for all along. He said the world teaches us to chase success, but Islam teaches you to chase sincerity. The world teaches pride. Islam teaches patience. The world teaches you to stand tall, but Islam teaches you when to bow, and in bowing you find your greatest strength. He said that's why Muslims are honored, because they live by a truth that doesn't bend with time. They pray when the world mocks them. They fast when the world feasts. They forgive when the world hates. And in every act of worship, they prove that faith isn't weakness. It's power, the purest kind. There was one more story he shared, his voice low, eyes distant. He said he once met an old woman in Medina. Wrinkled hands, tired eyes, yet she radiated peace. He asked her, What keeps you strong? She smiled a soft, knowing smile. Because my Lord never left me. Every prayer I prayed, every tear I shed, he saw it. That's enough honor for me. Steve said he walked away that day realizing something profound. You don't need the world's recognition when you already have God's. And maybe that's the secret. That's why Muslims are honored. Not because the world sees them, but because God does. As he told that story, his voice grew softer, like a man remembering something sacred. They carry something we've all forgotten. He said, a map back to humility, back to meaning, back to peace. And in the silence that followed, the air itself seemed to listen. He looked down, hands trembling slightly, eyes glistening with something deeper than sadness. Respect. I've seen a lot in my life, he whispered, but I've never seen anything like that kind of faith. You can't destroy it, you can't silence it, you can only stand in awe. The sound of the adhan began again, faint and distant, rising through the night like a heartbeat. The camera slowly faded to black, his last words echoing like a prayer. Maybe honor isn't in being remembered, he said quietly. Maybe it's in remembering who you bow to.